It's around a 12 elimination weekend at the Roval. There's lots of storylines, so let's get into them. We'll start with the biggest storyline heading into the weekend, which is the playoff cutline battle. After the lap 185 crash at Talladega last weekend flipped the entire bracket on its head, we now see Joey Logano, Daniel Suarez, Austin Cindric, and Chase Briscoe sitting a significant gap below the cut line. This contrasts heavily with how things looked before that crash, which is obviously exactly what you want in a championship format: unpredictability and chaos. What could be better? I am so glad Talladega is going to be in the round of 8 next year. Man, the playoffs are such a good and fair way to determine a champion. Anyway, before I get too deep in how much I love this perfect format, because trust me, that's an entire rant for the end of the season, let's take a look at the cut line drivers and their chances to advance to the next round. Starting with the furthest below the cut line, Chase Briscoe. Briscoe has made 3 Roval starts with finishes of 28th, 9th, and 22nd, which is an average finish of 19.7. To be blunt, outside of that top 10 finish in 2022, he hasn't run well here at all.
I'm adding this in during editing. I didn't realize he had won an Xfinity race at the Roval. It doesn't really change what I think is going to happen, but it's worth noting. Anyways, back to the video.
And with him sitting 32 points below the cut line, he's pretty much in a must-win situation. I don't really see any chance of him advancing to the next round, which unfortunately means that, by the looks of it, SHR's final championship run is going to end in the round of 12. Just above Briscoe, but in an almost equally precarious situation, we have Austin Cindric. Cindric is an interesting case. He's shown flashes at the Roval to start, but his finishes 21st and 25th. The largest glimmer of hope for that 2 team was their qualifying performance in 2022, where they qualified 5th. While that's not a pole or a top 5 finish, it shows there's potential for a great run in there, and he's going to need one as he's sitting 29 points below the cut line. His odds are slightly higher than Briscoe, but he's still in a pretty tough spot. I'd put his chances as unlikely, but not necessarily impossible. He's probably going to need to win. In a similar but slightly better position is Daniel Suarez. Suarez is weird because every year he shows speed here, outside of that 1 year with Gaunt Brothers, but he never really finishes well. This is shown by the fact that his best finish at the Roval came in 2021, where he started all the way back in 25th. While the last 2 years he started 3rd, but has finishes of 33rd and 36th. Doesn't really make any sense. But despite that, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say he'll make the round of 8. And that's not just because I may have told some people that he was still going to advance after his little brain-dead incident at Talladega last weekend. It is also because, even despite his best efforts to get eliminated, I feel like the racing gods are going to let him through. In essence, I'm essentially saying, is a golden horseshoe shoved up his ass? Anyway, Joey Logano. He's actually surprisingly good at the Roval. You wouldn't think so, because when you think of great road racers, you don't really think Joey Logano, but he does actually have an average finish of 8.7 in the 6 Roval races so far. But despite that, I don't think he's going to advance. That's because if you look at the drivers above him, none of them are really bad at the Roval. Elliott and Blaney both have wins at the track, while Bowman and Raddick have the best average finishes at 7 and 6.4. Yeah, that's right, Alex Bowman actually has the best average finish at the Roval. Doesn't feel quite right, but his worst finish there is 10th. So given the drivers Logano has to beat, and since I have Suarez advancing, I think Logano's playoff journey ends right here. But hey, I would not be surprised if he proved me wrong. Joining Logano, I've got his teammate Austin Cindric and also Chase Briscoe. I just don't think they have the resumes at the Roval to make up the gaps they find themselves in, and I see their journeys ending right here at Charlotte. And with Suarez advancing, someone currently above the cut line has to join them. And I'm just going to go with Denny Hamlin. While his 30-point gap is comfortable, it's not necessarily safe. And with his luck this year, and let's be honest, his tendency to be a choke artist, I feel that somehow, some way, whether it's his fault or not, he's going to find himself on the outside looking in at the end of the race. Now on to the potential spoilers to the playoff field. And for this section, I have one name in particular, and that's AJ Allmendinger. The biggest reason is he's the defending winner of this race. You can never count out a guy who's won at this track before, and to be honest, every other driver who could realistically win is already in the playoffs anyway, so they wouldn't make sense to be in this section. On a more unlikely spoiler, look at SVG. While normally he'd be up there with his teammate as a potential spoiler, I just think the Roval is so unique that you really need experience there specifically to be really good. And unfortunately, SVG just doesn't have that yet. I'm sure in a couple years he'll be battling for wins here. I just don't think that'll happen this year. His only real Roval type track experience is in the Rolex 24, but likely that won't be much help as Daytona is a different beast. Also, he raced a GT car, and while that kind of looks like a cup car, it's definitely not a cup car. So I don't think that's really going to be of any use to him. It's also worth noting that AJ and SVG will be swapping numbers this weekend, with SVG driving the 13 and AJ driving the 16. I assume this is just Kahlo trying to rekindle the magic from last year because AJ won last year in the 16. That's probably not going to be groundbreaking, but it's worth noting. Also, I guess keep an eye on Chris Buescher too. He's been pretty solid at the Roval, and he's spoiled the playoff field before in his career, so I guess keep an eye on him. Moving on from that, let's talk about the favorites. There's the defending Roval winner AJ Allmendinger, but I already talked about him, so let's move on to the only multi-time Roval winner, Chase Elliott. Chase collected back-to-back wins here in 2020 and 2021, and while he hasn't been as good at the road courses in the next-gen era, you still can't count him out. Moving on from one Hendrick driver lying about his name in William Clyde Elliott II, to another Hendrick driver lying about his name in Alexander Michael Warren Bowman. also known as Alex Bowman. Okay, Alex's name change isn't as wild, but it's the only way I could use that joke, and I wanted to use that joke, so deal with it. As I mentioned earlier, Bowman has the best average finish to Roval, and since the playoffs began, he's been driving like a man on the mission. Plus, he won another one of NASCAR's unique tracks in Chicago earlier this year. While Bowman has never won at the Roval, don't be surprised if you see him in victory lane on Sunday. The final driver I'm going to mention is Christopher Bell. While he only has one top 5 at the Roval, it was a clutch win in 2022. With him being 57 points above the cut line, he doesn't really need to push it, but that doesn't necessarily mean he won't, so expect him to try and go for the win on Sunday. Now, there are other drivers like Kyle Larson and Ryan Blaney that I could talk about, but to be honest, I don't really feel like editing all that. So which of these favorites am I picking to win Sunday? None of them. That's because I'm going with Daniel Suarez. That's right, I'm going against every bit of conceivable logic I have because I think Daniel Suarez has the NASCAR gods on his side. I'll either look like a complete idiot with this or a genius. Either way, I'm going with my gut. And if I called this, I may just retire because I don't think anything will ever top that. Anyway, that's my show. Let me know your predictions for the Roval in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you at the races.